Imagine for a moment a soul so gentle, so pure, that its only desire was to love, to give, to stand by others through storm and silence. A heart that offered loyalty when it wasn't earned, a spirit that gave compassion even when met with cruelty. This soul, God's child, was not weak. It was forged in faith, strengthened in truth, and lit with divine grace. But betrayal has a way of finding what's good. Like shadows hunting the last flicker of light, betrayal touched this soul with hands cloaked in deception. And the world looked away. People excused it. The betrayers laughed, but heaven did not remain silent. You see, betrayal doesn't simply end with a broken heart. It travels into the courts of heaven. When the hands of the wicked reach to destroy the innocent, they are not merely hurting a person. They are provoking God himself. And what the world calls silence, God calls setup. What looks like delay is often divine preparation. And when they thought they got away with it, when they celebrated their cruelty behind closed doors, God was already moving. Have you ever considered the weight of touching someone who belongs to God? Do they not understand that to touch God's child with betrayal is to strike against the throne of heaven itself? Every tear shed in the dark, every silent scream, every lonely prayer, God counted them. God heard them. And now, his justice is not just coming, it has arrived. There is something sacred about being chosen by God. It doesn't make you perfect, but it makes you protected. It doesn't mean you won't be wounded, but it guarantees the wound will become a weapon in God's hand. What they did to you, they didn't do in secret. They did it under the eyes of a God who never sleeps, never forgets, and never abandons his own. They thought betrayal would bury you, but betrayal is the very trigger that awakens divine wrath. The kind of wrath that doesn't just correct, it dismantles. The kind that doesn't just discipline, it devastates. And not because God is cruel, but because God is just. Some of them are confused right now. Their peace is disturbed, their success is slipping, their relationships are shattering. They're trying to fix the surface, unaware that the root of their downfall is not in the world, it's in what they did to you. When you were quiet, they thought you were weak. But you weren't quiet, you were sacred. You were being held in the hand of God while he let them dig their own graves with their pride and dishonor. God's wrath doesn't always appear as fire from heaven. Sometimes it appears as silence that echoes with consequence. Sometimes it's when everything they touch starts to rot, when doors close that were once open, when joy becomes elusive, and the very things they used to mock you for are the things they begin to lose one by one. That's the wrath of a father, not born of revenge, but of righteous defense, because you are not just anyone. You are a child of the King. And the betrayal they gave you was not simply against you, it was against the one who called you, anointed you, and set you apart. That's why their life is unraveling. That's why confusion clouds their mind. That's why favor is fleeing from them like a shadow at sunrise. God isn't cruel, but he is holy, and his justice is perfect. Let us now walk together into the 7 truths that unfold from this divine reality. These truths are not just lessons, they are spiritual laws. Each one reveals how betrayal against the innocent activates a divine response, how God's children are never truly alone, and how heaven fights battles that flesh can never see. Here are the 7 pillars of this spiritual unfolding. When someone betrays a person, the world often sees it as a human issue. Between 2 individuals, a relationship gone wrong, a friendship torn, a bond broken. But when that person is a child of God, deeply anchored in faith, Walking in obedience and covered by divine purpose, that betrayal crosses a spiritual boundary. It is no longer just an offense committed in the flesh. It becomes a provocation in the spirit. It becomes an act against the God who appointed, anointed, and protected that individual with divine love. To betray one of God's own is to forget who is watching over them. It is to assume that silence from heaven is permission. But divine patience is never divine passiveness. Betrayal becomes a spiritual weapon when it is directed at the innocent, and it touches not just their heart, but God's justice. Those who betray God's child often do so believing they're dealing with weakness, when in fact they're dealing with consecration. They mistake gentleness for fragility and kindness for lack of discernment. But the truth is, when they plotted in secrecy, God was already present. When they lied, deceived, manipulated, and dismissed, the presence of God recorded every act. Not for punishment alone, but for timing. The scripture reminds us, "Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm." That's not just a poetic warning. It's a spiritual law. Those who touch God's children with impure intent forget that they're not acting in an empty space. They're acting within the presence of divine justice. The betrayal of God's chosen triggers not just heartbreak, it awakens the force of heaven. But here's what they don't understand. The pain they caused didn't just hurt feelings, it broke a divine trust. When God entrusts someone with purity, loyalty, and love, He expects that others will treat that person with the same care heaven has extended. But betrayal violates that trust, not only between two people, but between the betrayer and God. It turns love into evidence. Tears become testimony, and silence becomes a courtroom where God's judgment is rendered not with noise, but with outcome. Betraying someone that God has His hand upon is a dangerous decision. It invites a kind of divine attention that few are prepared for. Because God does not overlook cruelty done to His own. He does not ignore deception, especially when it is used against the hearts He guards. So, when betrayal enters the life of God's child, the consequence is never confined to human terms. It enters heaven's ledger, and heaven never forgets. This is why their life begins to shift after the betrayal. This is why confusion enters their plans and peace escapes their reach. They thought they were playing a human game, but they were moving on a divine board. And when they touched God's chosen with betrayal, they provoked something far greater than human anger. They awakened the wrath of the Lord, who calls that soul His own. There's a peculiar confidence that often follows betrayal. The betrayer walks away, feeling powerful, unchallenged, and perhaps even celebrated. They believe their silence is a strategy, their cruelty is calculated, and the absence of immediate consequence convinces them that they have won. They misinterpret quiet as approval. They see your tears and misunderstand them as weakness. They walk away believing they've scored a final blow. But what they fail to realize is that every step they take away from righteousness is a step toward divine reckoning. You see, the silence of the betrayed is not silence. It is a courtroom being prepared in heaven. The delay in justice is not absence. It is God aligning His response. The pain suffered in private does not remain unseen. It is witnessed by the one who sees in secret and rewards openly. The very moment they congratulated themselves for hurting you, they signed the invitation for God's judgment to enter their life. What they thought was a silent victory is in fact a loud siren in the spiritual realm. It declares rebellion, it alerts angels, it awakens divine balance. They assumed they'd gotten away with betrayal because nothing collapsed instantly. But divine timing is not human timing. God lets them laugh, build, and boast, only so they can witness how far they fall. Because God's judgment is not reactive, He waits until the foundation they built in arrogance begins to shake under the weight of the very sin they committed. They thought they could betray a heart God loved and escape unnoticed. They didn't hear the divine echo that followed their betrayal. Every smile they gave after wounding you, every celebration they held over your silence, every moment of peace they enjoyed. Those were not signs of escape. They were borrowed breaths before accountability. And here's the truth. Judgment does not always come in thunder or fire. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, the breakdown of peace, the erosion of favor, the decay of their influence. Doors that once opened easily begin to close. Relationships they valued start to wither. Their plans crumble, not because of bad luck, but because of spiritual consequence. And suddenly, they are confused. But confusion is the first language of divine judgment. It disorients the proud so they can't escape the justice they once mocked. The moment they betrayed God's child, heaven took note. The moment they claimed a victory over the innocent, they welcomed wrath. And the life they are living now, the chaos, the emptiness, the loss, that's not coincidence, it's consequence. A sacred response to the pain they caused without remorse, a judgment tailor-made for the betrayal they committed in secret, but now must pay for in full view. There's a mystery in how God handles betrayal. He doesn't always act the way we expect. We imagine fire from heaven, thunder rolling across the skies, or a dramatic unraveling of the wrongdoer's life in front of the world. But God doesn't always respond with spectacle. Sometimes his wrath arrives slowly, deliberately, silently. It is not the noise that signals the power of his judgment. It is the quiet persistence with which it moves through every corner of the betrayer's life. When someone touches a pure soul with betrayal, and God chooses to act, he often begins by removing his hand, and that alone is devastating. The same divine protection they once enjoyed begins to lift. Opportunities dry up, peace becomes distant, the favor that followed them disappears, and still, they don't realize what's happening, because the wrath of God doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives like a rising tide, inch by inch, surrounding everything they once used to feel secure. It's easy for them to dismiss it in the beginning. They'll call it stress, they'll blame people, they'll think it's just a tough season. But slowly, everything they try begins to fail. Not with a crash, but with a quiet, consistent collapse. Because when someone betrays a soul covered in divine light, they inherit a spiritual consequence that cannot be escaped with apologies or explanations. The betrayal enters their atmosphere, and God allows them to taste the slow burn of the judgment they sowed with their cruelty. He is a God of patience, but that patience isn't approval. It's the stillness before justice. It's the quiet that makes the reckoning unavoidable. Because the more time they are given, the more tangled they become in the net they wove for others. The same lies they told to trap you begin to trap them. The same manipulation they used becomes the language others now use on them. The wrath of God is not merely punishment, it is poetic reversal, and when it fully surrounds, it does not miss a single detail. And perhaps the most haunting part of this judgment is the internal decay. Their soul starts to feel hollow. Their spirit grows restless. They can't sleep like they used to. They look happy, but something's breaking beneath the surface. That's God, not shouting, but whispering with consequence. Not striking, but consuming. He doesn't destroy them all at once. He dismantles them slowly so they can witness their own fall, piece by piece. This is the wrath they never saw coming. Because it doesn't knock, it seeps. It seeps into their home, their peace, their health, their relationships, their reputation, their mind. until they're surrounded and consumed, not by fire, but by the very justice they thought they'd escaped. God surrounds the wicked with the results of their own choices, and then, quietly, allows the truth to finish what it started. It's easy to think of betrayal as a moment, a decision made, a trust broken, a wound inflicted. But in heaven's eyes, betrayal is not an isolated act. It is a ripple that disturbs the spiritual fabric of justice. When a pure soul is betrayed, it does not end with pain. It begins a process of divine alignment, because purity has weight in the spiritual realm. And when it is violated, God responds not just with justice, but with a comprehensive correction that often touches every corner of the betrayer's life. They may have thought that what they did to you was small. They may have shrugged it off as something you would get over. They believed your silence was the end of the story. But what they didn't realize was that your purity spoke louder than their betrayal. God doesn't ignore purity. He responds to it. And when it is betrayed, his response is not fragmented. It is complete. Every aspect of their life becomes vulnerable to spiritual consequence. It starts subtly, maybe with relationships that begin to crumble for no clear reason. Friends who once adored them start to withdraw. Favor that once flowed effortlessly becomes scarce. Plans that look promising fall apart in unexpected ways. They'll say, "Nothing is working anymore." But what they don't realize is that they're now walking through the wreckage of what they did to someone God called his own, and this is what makes it terrifying. God's consequences are not always dramatic, they are thorough. He touches their emotions, their confidence, their peace of mind. He allows anxiety to replace the pride that once fueled them. He lets guilt become the voice they hear when everything else is quiet, and the pain they inflicted in secret becomes the weight they now carry in silence. Because when heaven responds, it does not leave loose ends. Sometimes the consequence shows up in the very areas they once mocked you in. If they mocked your loneliness, they begin to feel the ache of isolation. If they laughed at your loss, they begin to experience a series of losses they can't explain. The areas where they celebrated your pain become the very areas where their own suffering begins. This is not coincidence. It is God's hand making all things even. And perhaps the most sobering truth is this: God doesn't always strike back immediately because he allows them to build a life with their stolen peace. Only so he can tear it down in front of them, not out of cruelty, but to reveal the truth. And that truth is clear. What you do to the pure does not stay hidden. It becomes a seed, and that seed grows, not in your life, but in theirs. And when the harvest comes, it touches every corner, every plan, every smile, every dream, because heaven does not play favorites, but it does protect the innocent. And that protection comes with a justice that is far-reaching and unmistakable. There is a sacred difference between being a victim and being a witness. The world may label those who have been betrayed as victims, fragile, broken, discarded, but heaven sees them differently. God never allows pain without purpose, and when one of his children is betrayed, he begins a transformation that cannot be undone by human cruelty. What they meant to destroy you with becomes the very ground where God raises you as a living witness of his justice. You were never meant to stay in the place of pain. Yes, you felt it, you walked through it, you cried in silence. But God never intended for that pain to define you. He intended it to refine you. You are not the sum of what they did. You are the beginning of what God is about to reveal. Your story is shifting from sorrow to testimony. And it's not just any testimony. It is one heaven will use to prove that those who walk with God may be betrayed, but they will never be buried by it. The betrayal that came against you was loud. It sought to crush your spirit and silence your joy. But now, watch how God raises you in silence with strength that shocks even you. He's giving you back what they stole, but not in the same measure, in greater abundance. The doors they tried to shut are opening wider. The respect they tried to strip from you is being restored with honor, and through it all, you are becoming a witness. One who stands as living proof that God sees, God knows, and God repays. You see, your survival wasn't just about getting through the betrayal. It was about becoming someone new because of it. You became wiser. You learned to see people with spiritual eyes. You discovered the difference between those who speak well and those who live well. That wasn't loss. It was training. And now God is using you to display what divine favor looks like when the world has turned against you. The betrayers expected to see you fall apart. They waited for your failure. They were ready to say, "See, we were right," but instead, God kept you. Even when you couldn't explain how you were still standing, God held you up. And that's what makes you a witness, not just someone who survived, but someone who was sustained. Someone who can say, "They tried to break me, but heaven built me back stronger." Now they watch from a distance. They don't say it out loud, but they see it. The glow that didn't come from revenge, but from restoration. The strength that didn't come from fighting back, but from surrendering to God's justice. You were not left behind. You were elevated, quietly and righteously. And the same betrayal that was supposed to end you is now the backdrop of your divine becoming. And every time you walk in peace, every time you rise with grace, every time you speak with truth, you are not a victim retelling a painful story. You are a witness declaring a holy one. You are proof that God does not forget those who are wounded unjustly. You are His message to the world. I saw it all, and I answered with elevation. Pain that is caused in secret never stays secret. It echoes, it multiplies, it finds its way back, not to the innocent who endured it, but to the one who initiated it. You see, betrayal doesn't disappear just because the world didn't see it. When someone intentionally causes harm behind closed doors, especially to someone walking in purity and sincerity, they are sowing seeds in darkness. But all seeds grow, and when the harvest comes, it's never private. The betrayers thought their actions were clever. They believed their smiles would cover their schemes. They hid behind politeness, behind carefully constructed lies, behind friendships and blood ties. They acted like nothing happened. But just because no one confronted them doesn't mean heaven didn't. Just because they escaped judgment from people doesn't mean they escaped judgment from God. The betrayal was their decision, but the pain it caused became heaven's concern. And this is where divine irony takes root. The exact pain they caused you begins to show up in their own life. Not because you wished it, not because you wanted revenge, but because pain is not an emotion. It is a spiritual transaction. It travels back to its sender when it has fulfilled its purpose in the life of the one who was wounded. And when it returns, it's heavier because it carries the weight of divine justice. They broke your trust. Now they can't trust anyone. They left you in silence. Now they scream inside and no one listens. They took joy in watching you cry. Now joy escapes them, no matter how much they chase it. This is not cruelty, it's consequence. The very thing they thought they hid so well becomes the very thing that haunts them openly. And here's the part they never expected. Their life starts to unravel in ways that feel eerily familiar. That's not coincidence, it's reflection. What they gave out in the dark is now being handed back to them in the light. The people they used to manipulate now manipulate them. The confusion they placed in your heart now clouds their own decisions. They find themselves in situations where no one believes them, just as they once made others doubt you. And they wonder why. Why are things falling apart? Why do they feel so empty? Why does everything they build collapse? But they never stop to trace it back. They never see the thread that connects their current downfall to the past pain they caused. But God sees. He never disconnects cause from effect. He may delay, but He never forgets. And the downfall itself is crafted by divine hands. It doesn't come in random suffering. It comes in targeted moments. Moments that reveal exactly what they did, but this time from the other side. They are now the ones misunderstood, the ones abandoned, the ones betrayed. And it is in those moments that heaven speaks, not through words, but through mirrored pain. It is there they begin to understand what they once dismissed. The betrayal they sowed in silence becomes the sorrow they reap in full view. There is a vast difference between divine wrath and human revenge. People often confuse the two, but they come from entirely different places. Human revenge is born out of pain. It seeks to get even, to settle the score, to hurt back. But God's wrath isn't rooted in broken emotion. It is rooted in holy justice. It is not a wild reaction. It is a precise response. When God moves in wrath, He does so not to get even, but to make things right, to restore what was broken, to elevate what was discarded, and to bring down what was lifted by pride and injustice. The betrayal you experienced didn't just hurt. It altered your life. It affected your trust, your peace, your confidence. It changed how you saw people. And yet, you didn't retaliate. You didn't strike back with the same venom. Instead, you held on. You cried in silence. You leaned on God, and heaven noticed. That's why this wrath you see unfolding around your betrayers isn't about revenge. It's about divine order. It's about putting everything back in its rightful place, starting with you. When God begins to restore, He doesn't just return what you lost, He transforms it. He makes it better. The relationships you lost are replaced with real, loyal ones. The opportunities that slip through your fingers are replaced with ones that were designed just for you. The confidence that was shattered is rebuilt with wisdom, strength, and discernment. And the peace that once felt distant begins to settle inside your soul like a healing rain. This is not coincidence. It is restoration. It is the evidence that God saw the betrayal and decided to respond, not with temporary relief, but with eternal repair. At the same time, those who betrayed you are being humbled, not because God enjoys their suffering, but because pride cannot go unchallenged, especially when it rises against one of His own. They built themselves up on the foundation of your pain. They climbed higher while stepping on your trust. They celebrated while you were weeping, but the higher they built, the further they now fall. Not because you wanted it, but because God ordained it. Saints Pride Preacher. Not merely black cast, but rarely illegally, you stood up, you pilled it up for yourself, so you could become a man. Not because you wanted it, but because God ordained it. This is divine retribution. Not to destroy, but to humble. To bring the proud to a place of recognition. To show them that what they did was not hidden, not forgotten, and not without consequence. It is a call to repentance, if they will take it, and if they don't, the descent continues. That's how God operates. He gives chances, but He does not ignore injustice. You, on the other hand, are rising, not through force, but through favor, not through striving, but through surrender. You are living proof that God doesn't just watch from a distance. He steps in, He restores, He avenges, He elevates, and He does so in a way that no man can undo. His wrath has never been about getting even. It has always been about setting the scales of justice right, restoring the innocent, humbling the wicked, and revealing His glory in the process. So if you've been asking, why did they get away with it? The answer is, they didn't. If you've been wondering, when will God step in? The truth is, He already has. You are in the middle of His answer. You are being restored day by day, and they are feeling the weight of what they once celebrated. Not by your hand, but by His. God's wrath is not a punishment for the sake of pain. It is a process of purification. It cleans up what man tried to ruin. It tears down what was built on dishonor, and it resurrects what was buried by betrayal. That's the kind of God you serve. One who doesn't miss a single tear. One who answers not with noise, but with undeniable results. You were touched by betrayal, but God touched your life with favor. They tried to destroy what they didn't build, forgetting that they were not just harming you. They were challenging the one who made you. They thought your silence was weakness. They thought their actions would never catch up to them. But God was already in motion. He has seen everything. He has recorded every pain. And now He is moving not to satisfy vengeance, but to fulfill justice. You, the wounded, are being made whole. You, the rejected, are being restored. And those who broke what was sacred are now watching as their own lives unravel, not from cruelty, but from divine balance. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your restoration. You are walking proof that God protects His own. You are the testimony that silence is not abandonment, and those who thought they could touch God's child with betrayal are now learning, painfully and publicly, that heaven always answers. Stand tall, child of God. You were never forgotten. You were just being prepared for a restoration so holy even your enemies will have no words, only regret.